Alright, vocals. So to get started, basically the way I've got my setup for this is I've got all the individual tracks, so that's going to be harmonies and different leads and stuff like that, going into two different paths. So the first path is going to be direct to the vocal bus. The second path is going to be through all these individual effects, which will then lead into the effects bus. So it's kind of like adding its own bus with plugins and stuff, but each one has a different little slider if I feel like I want to increase that, instead of having to go individually to the plugin. So with that said, I'll just get started on one of the vocal tracks here, solo it out, and kind of show you the chain I'm using. So something kind of crazy about this release is it's the first release I did without using my normal chain. When I say normal chain, I mean a series of all of these plugins that I typically use. It's typically going to be Soothe, a Gate, Pro MB for the plosives, and then a little bit of saturation, a DS, and then either a Pultec LA2A 1176 or a Manley Vox box. But the difference with this one is I got offered the Aurora DSP Banshee, and I found it to be an all-inclusive juggernaut of a vocal plugin. So if you guys want to check this out, it's super good. I wasn't paid to say that. I did get it for free, but it's pretty much replaced like $1,000+ worth of plugins. So whatever value it is definitely worth it. But with that said, I'll just get started on the track. I'm going to turn off each module just so I can show you what they're individually doing. So this is the sound just straight up from my mic.
I could feel it in the air as you walked away.
And then starting with the Banshee, it's got this input section. It's kind of crazy, but basically it's got a preamp character. I prefer the option B, but there's some different ones to give you. That's going into a gate. That's going into a gate, which is pretty helpful, especially when you have really heavy processing, so it doesn't pick up on any background sound. Into an auto tune. I don't use that. If I need to have any amount of tuning, I'll do it with Melodyne, but it's cool that it's on offer. And then it's got a de-esser built into it. So let's find an SE phrase.
Yeah, as you walked away.
Yeah, so it's just going to bring that down. It's not so crazy now, but you'll definitely hear that once you get compressors and drives making it sound crazy. And this is pretty much just going to make your microphone sound good with mix. So off.
Yeah, as you walked away. Who was to blame?
And then dynamics is actually really cool. So it's got two different compressors, and one of them can be a limiter if you want. I've got them just straight up on compression. So I think one's probably doing heavy lifting with gain reduction, and then the other one's just doing a little bit less. So let's see.
Yeah, as you walked away.
I previously liked to use the LA2A to kind of get that initial huge amount. So it might be anywhere between like 3 decibels to like 10, 15 decibels of gain reduction, just so I can get a really controlled vocal. And then I would use the the 1176 to kind of capture somewhere between like 3 and 5 decibels, just for like the brick wall control of that. But I noticed with the compressor on this section, they can both do a similar thing. And if I have it on limiting mode, it's going to be a lot more like the 1176, but I actually preferred the smoothness of the compressor on this, so I just let it go like that, and then I'll have a limiter later on. And then I've got a drive. Something really interesting about this plugin is you can blend the different drive types. So what I'm trying to do here is try to give it like a thickness, a little bit of a grit, almost like a tape-like grit, but I don't want to lose the clarity of the hi-fi EQ I'm setting up. So I'll show you before and after.
Yeah, as you walked away. Who was to blame?
You can really hear that mid-range thickness, and that's going to sound really good once the mix is bigger, so your vocals don't sound too scooped. So moving forward to the doubler, this is actually a really cool effect to have included in the plugin, just so you don't have to get a different doubler, because I've gone through so many different doublers at this point. So before...
Yeah, as you walked away.
And especially for this verse, it's a single vocal. It's so good to have a doubler just so you can fill in some of that stereo width. You've got the guitars hard panned, but it's really good to have something in the space there. So when the vocals are more mono, you can really increase the doubler, make it sound nice and thick. And then for the mod, I've got a chorus on. So before.
Yeah, as you walked away. Who was to blame?
As you notice with the doubler, it's kind of slightly adding a left and a right, but with the chorus, it feels like it's actually adding 2 versions of it on a left and a right rather than like spreading it. So I feel like it really makes it even thicker with that sort of delay. And then finally, it's got this module, which basically has a de-esser, a widener, a limiter, and a leveler. That's pretty crazy considering that's like 4 different plugins that you would have that all have a not cheap value. So a de-esser after the fact is going to help you kind of tame anything that's been added as you went through. So when you add a drive or compressor, it might pick up on those S's more. Now you can add a de-esser to really do that. And it's also got a widener with a different range. So here you can increase the width based off of a range of frequencies. So if you want the range to be wider for higher frequencies, that's a pretty common trick or something like that. It's got a limiter, which is going to be super helpful for modern vocals when you want to get it absolutely controlled, because you're going to have crazy elements in a mix. Having a limiter will make your vocals stay on top. And lastly, it's got a leveler. I opted it off on this, but it can be helpful sometimes. So this is with it all off.
Yeah, as you walked away, who was to blame?
Yeah, just this out module itself is extremely valuable. So that's the chain that I'm going to be running pretty much everything through. They're going to have varying levels of differences for like the heavier vocals. It's going to have a little bit more drive and it's going to have less higher frequencies just so it doesn't get too annoying. And then for the harmonies, everything's going to have a little bit less of the S's and high end coming through just so they make a more thick note. So I'll just show you what everything sounds like together, and then I'll show you it through the effects chain. So here's verse 2 with the different harmonies.
So far away, the moments we miss in a day.
And then the final chorus with all the different harmonies.
Stayed in the moments we'll never miss again.
And now I'll show you what the effects chain is doing. Just some extra cloudy thickness that really helps it mix into all the different elements in the instruments. So now let's play it all together and see how it sounds before we get to mastering. And I almost forgot, here is the vocal bus. So starting with the de-esser here, I think I added this because the S's were coming in, especially with the different harmonies. Altogether, it kind of sound a little bit harsh, so let's see what this is doing. So yeah, cleaning that up a little bit, and then soothe. I usually use a little bit more soothe than I would expect on vocals, so let's see what this is doing. Definitely taking out some of the fundamental notes and a little bit of the S sounds at the top. And the last Pro Q is actually doing an insane amount. This is one of the bigger things I'll do with my revisions. I'll notice, especially using a new vocal chain, there's a lot of different EQ movements I like to make as I'm doing all the other things. So for example, if I start noticing the guitars are a little harsh, I'll bring the guitar upper mid-range down, but then I'll notice, okay, now the vocals are harsh. All those changes kind of combine together, and this is all the changes that I did with the vocals. As you can see, mainly it's controlling the S's up there and a little bit of the upper mid-range harshness and increasing some of the low end just so I can get some more body in there after I took away some of the plosives. So this is without. All right, and that's the vocal chain.